So this video is a slightly different pace on my channel, but because I'm Canadian and most of my audience are Americans, I've had a lot of people asking me, what do I think about this whole Canada becoming the 51st state business with Trump, of course? And probably the easiest way to answer that question is by asking in return, well, what would you think if a foreign leader started talking about your country like that? Obviously, not a lot of Canadians are going to be thrilled by that idea. And if you've heard reports about Canadians who do want to join the US, I think they're probably inflated and exaggerated. I haven't met a single person who agrees with that. But further, I don't think American patriots should be thrilled about Canadians who are eager to turn their or exchange their maple leafs in for stars and stripes, because as patriots yourselves, you should recognize that patriotism is a virtue. Love of one's home and country is a virtue in the order of justice. Aquinas specifically taught that, where just as it is the duty of religion to give worship to God, so it is the duty of piety to give due honor to one's parents and one's country. We ought to love our home and be ready to bless it and labor for its good. And yes, there are obvious problems in Canada, many that I could opine about, but for a virtuous person, that should inspire loyalty and commitment and new resolution to bless and to love your country as much, if not more, than a desire to go look for a new dance partner. And if I were an American, I would be reluctant and suspicious of any Canadian who, at the first sign of adversity, would rather jump ship. Is that really the kind of citizen that you want, like a turncoat? Even in historical conflicts, there have often been people who betrayed their countrymen to the enemy, but even by the side that benefited from that betrayal, they would often still think of those traitors in contemptible ways, because while it might benefit them, it's still kind of a disgraceful thing to do. Now, with that said, I'm not convinced that the massive globalist modern nation state is what Aquinas had in mind when he spoke about one's country. Personally, for myself, my loyalty is much stronger to my local community in the province I live in, which is Alberta. It's a lot stronger than the loyalty and the love I can muster for the whole concept of Canada, a geographical territory so vast that I haven't visited most of it, and I have no meaningful relationship to most of its citizens. So I am willing to see both sides of this debate, but whatever side you take, the point I want to make with this video is that Trump, and you, if you're a Trump voter, should not want Canada. And if he's actually serious about that, and it isn't just some sort of negotiating tactic or distraction, then I'd argue that it's a waste of his and your time. And I'm gonna share 3 reasons why I think that's the case. The first should be extremely obvious, but if you don't know anything about Canada, I guess it's forgivable, but Canada is, for the most part, a very left-leaning country. So if Canada really did join the United States, you'd be inheriting, I think we're at like 40 million people right now, who would be mostly Democrat Party voters, especially if it was a Republican leader who took our sovereignty away. It would be like adding another California to your country. And even conservatives in Canada, of which I would identify myself as, are a very different kind of conservatism than what you typically find in like the Republican Party. I know that I'd probably find people in the Republican Party that have similar sympathies as me, but for the most part, the big blonde hair, don't tread on me, Ayn Rand, individualist, like prosperity gospel kind of conservatism that seems to be very popular in the States is not something that Canadian conservatives would identify with. Conservatives in Canada follow in a more kind of European pedigree from thinkers like Edmund Burke and our own contributions in people like George Grant, who actually warned against a kind of North American continentalism and cultural absorption, or the risk of that, of Canada by the US. So even among more conservative Canadians, you won't see an increase in Republican voters, or for the ones you do, they will be reluctant participants in that enterprise. And I constantly hear conservative pundits talking about the immigration problem in the States by pointing out that the reason the Democrat Party is so eager to champion the cause of illegal residents is because, as the accusation goes, they stand to inherit all kinds of voters if they can legitimize those people's status as citizens. Well, that's definitely what you would get if Canada joined the United States, and especially if Canada was forced or coerced to join the United States. It would be a very, very bad situation for the Republican Party. Okay, reason number 2, Canada and the United States both have serious problems in need of serious remedies. I don't think that fact is lost on anybody. Then the thing is, problems aren't usually best addressed by adding more complexity to the situation. If anything, that makes it easier to obscure the source of your problem and therefore harder to find a solution. Like the United States has a $1 trillion deficit, not debt, But deficit, that's how much money you're losing in this year alone. That's a number so unimaginably large that it's virtually unintelligible to your average voter. You might as well say that we're in the hole by I don't know, like 1,000,000 dragon eggs or something like that at this point, and it would make about as much sense to the people trying to make sense of that. That is a massive problem. And you don't solve a problem like that by adding new layers of complexity to it. Canada, of course, has its own problems, which are uniquely Canadian. You don't want to then inherit those problems on top of your own before you adequately address your own problems. For example, if I went to a psychologist and said something like, "Doc, I got too many problems. My kids won't listen to me. My back hurts. My wife is cheating on me. My boss won't give me a raise. I'm addicted to pornography. My diet is a mess." If they were a good doctor, they'd probably want to focus on the main issues that are causing all of these problems. They'd want to simplify the list and solve as many problems with as few solutions as possible. What they wouldn't do is say, I think you should buy another home or start a side business. That'll solve things for you. New challenges and new problems are the absolutely wrong thing to do in a situation like that. And the United States has a long list of problems. And I think that that's why a lot of people turned to Trump, hoping that he can focus on those domestic problems with a refreshing and new approach. But instead, he seems to be focusing all, or at least too much attention on countries like Canada, which frankly should be way down the list of concerns, if one at all. I thought Trump and his supporters were supposed to be anti-globalist. Am I wrong on that? He certainly campaigned on that kind of messaging. In a 2015 campaign speech, he said, "We can't be the policeman of the world. We owe $19 trillion. We have to rebuild our country." In a 2016 Republican presidential debate, he again decried the fact that the United States was out there trying to police the world and getting nothing in return. And in his 2017 inaugural address after he was elected, he said, "We do not seek to impose our way of life on anyone else, but rather to let it shine as an example for everyone to follow." And those are admirable sentiments. Those are the kinds of things that would have motivated me if I was a Republican voter, if I was an American. But instead, it sure sounds like he's seeking to impose a way of life on Canada at the moment, and that he's directing a lot of his attention at the international level rather than the domestic problems that he promised to focus his attention on. Like, Republicans are supposed to be about, at least in part, reducing the size of power of government, and the US government is admittedly a massively bloated entity. Wasn't the whole point of electing someone like Donald Trump aimed at cutting all of that bloat back? Like, drain the swamp, cut the red tape. Those are phrases and slogans I kept hearing from his supporters. So how does absorbing the second largest geographical nation in the world and suddenly adding like 40 million more people with their own peculiar sensibilities, history, and culture, how does that fit in with this idea of cutting back and simplifying the federal government's power? Like, I thought MAGA was about making America great and reorienting the focus of the federal government on domestic concerns. Talking about taking over foreign countries like Canada, that strikes me as a mere globalist move. And if you're Catholic like I am, then you should be a fan of Catholic social teaching, principles like subsidiarity, which states that the governance of human affairs are best addressed at the smallest and most immediate level, and that larger and more immediate powers should only get involved when they're needed. So that means like the family should have the most authority over the way they live their lives. And then the municipality and those authorities should only get involved in the family when they're needed. And then the state should only get involved in the municipality when it's needed, and so on as you get bigger and more centralized. And I'd hope that the rationale for this should be obvious whether you're on the left or the right. People who are on the ground, who are intimately familiar with the situation there, who have a personal stake in it, and who are likely going to be affected by decisions made about it, are the best people to make those decisions. People who are remote, unfamiliar, and unaffected by governing decisions and tempted by the degree of power that they wield because it's more power, those people should be expected to show restraint as much as possible. So like, people who don't know or love my kids are way less qualified to make critical decisions about their lives, way less qualified than my wife and I are. People who don't live in a community, who don't understand its culture, its region, its climate, its history, are less qualified to make consequential decisions about it than the people who actually live there. But as nations become bigger and more powerful, we continue to see drift from this good governance principle. Think about how you pay your taxes. In my case, The vast majority of my taxes are paid to the federal government rather than my local community right here where I live. Most of the money I get taxed gets removed from my community and then sent 3,400 kilometers away to a federal bureaucracy, and then they decide what to do with it. How does that make any sense? But if Trump gets his way, then my federal income taxes would then go 3,800 kilometers away to a bureaucracy that knows nothing about my life up here in Canada and for whom I never asked them to get involved in it. So if you're at all traditionally minded, if you're about small and decentralized government, then you should find the idea of America absorbing Canada to be a massive step in the absolute wrong direction. And if you elected Trump on the grounds of reducing the size, power, and influence of the federal government, then you have to know that this kind of talk from him is absolutely contrary to those ideas. Okay, lastly, I want to give a bonus reason, which is that Trump's rhetoric and interference in Canadian politics has actually severely harmed the conservative cause here in Canada, because we were poised to have a major conservative victory over Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party, who frankly has really screwed things up here and is the main culprit in a lot of the things that Trump has complained about. Things like loose borders, lack of contribution to NATO, rampant crime, and then drugs like fentanyl coming across the border. These are all direct consequences of Liberal policies, and Canadians were finally fed up with it and ready to give the Liberal Party the old Canadian a boot in favor of the Conservative Party. But when Trump started threatening our sovereignty, it gave Canadians a distraction from who our real enemy is. And nothing plays into the hands of corrupt leaders like a scapegoat or a boogeyman or a mutual enemy that they can blame, which is now what the Liberals are doing. They're putting all of the attention away from their own degeneracy and towards the threat of a Trump takeover. And so far, it's been working for them. The Conservative Party was polling way up there, extremely high, enough to win a majority government, which is quite rare for Canada. But then when Trump began with this whole 51st state rhetoric, Canadians started galvanizing around the Liberal Party under their new leader again, and now they're polling to win the election that they've just called. They've been able to completely exploit this opportunity that Trump gift-wrapped for them. And I'm not sure if that was on purpose, if he's just trying to help left-wing political parties in other countries, but it sure has screwed over conservatives and reasonable Canadians who were looking for some relief in this decline that we've been on. So that's just one more reason why you won't hear true conservatives in Canada saying, "Thank you, Trump." And unless he's playing some kind of 4D chess move that has evaded all of us, I think he should give it a rest and let Canadians decide what to do with our corrupt government, instead of distracting us with foreign threats of a hostile takeover, which only benefits the incumbent party. A quick thank you to one of my sponsors, Charity Mobile. So if you're a US resident, you should switch to a phone company who aligns with your values rather than against them. For nearly 30 years, Charity Mobile has been supporting the cause of life and the traditional family, and they send 5% of your monthly plan price to the pro-life, pro-family charity of your choice. They call this Everyday Living Effortless Giving. All of their plans start under $50, including the unlimited plan. And they also have a talk and text only plan if you don't want cellular data for yourself or your kids. They have phones to meet every need with great nationwide coverage and no contracts. Now you can buy the way you believe with Charity Mobile. US residents can use promo code Brian to get a free phone with free activation and free shipping. Visit CharityMobile.com to learn more. Again, that's CharityMobile.com, promo code Brian.